Welcome to The Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to The Unstressed Exec, where we talk about how to perform, lead, and live with clarity, calm, and confidence, even when life feels like it's coming apart at the seams. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, forensic psychologist, executive and resilience coach, and someone who has spent decades studying how the mind, the body, and behavior intersect in real relationships, real workplaces, and real lives. Before we dive in, quick reminder. If these conversations resonate with you and you want practical tools to apply what you're learning, check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity. It's a no bullshit, clinically grounded guide designed to help you spot manipulation early, regulate your responses, and protect your clarity in high conflict situations. You can find it on Amazon. I'll link it in the show notes. Now, for today's topic, we're stepping into a territory that I think every professional, every leader, and frankly, every human being navigating life in 2025 needs to truly understand. We're talking about artificial intelligence and mental health, specifically the explosion of AI-powered mental health tools, such as chatbots, apps, coaches, companions, and what the clinical science actually says about when they help, when they fall short, and when they can cause real harm. This episode is titled, Your New Therapist is an Algorithm, What AI Mental Health Tools Get Right and Dangerously Wrong. And let me be clear up front. I'm not here to tell you AI is evil or that technology has no place in mental health. That's not my stance at all. I'm quite bullish on AI and the potential it has to supplement and help human flourishing. And as someone who sits at the intersection of clinical psychology, forensic work, and executive coaching, I really think it's my job to give you the full picture, not the marketing version. So today we're going to cover what AI mental health tools actually are and how they're being used, what the clinical evidence says they do well, where the real psychological dangers lie, what your brain does when it forms relationships with the machine, and then how to make smart, grounded decisions about integrating these tools into your own mental wellness practice. So to begin, what are we actually talking about? First, let's define the landscape, because AI mental health tools is a broad term that covers very different things. At one end, you have clinically validated digital therapeutics, apps like Woebot, Wysa, and Headspace's guided meditation tools. These are structured, evidence-based frameworks like cognitive behavioral therapy to deliver psychoeducation and skill-building exercises. These have been through some degree of clinical research, and they're not just chatbots making things up on the fly. In the middle, you have general-purpose AI platforms such as ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And these are ones that millions of people are now turning to for emotional processing, relationship advice, and mental health support. These were not built specifically for that purpose, however, but they are being used that way at massive scale. And there's some difficulties with it that I'll get into. And at the far end of that continuum, you have AI companion apps, Replika being the most prominent example, that are explicitly designed to function as a relational presence, an entity you can talk to, vent to, and even build a relationship with. And these are where the psychology and the psychological territory gets genuinely complex. This market has exploded. There are now over 10,000 mental health apps available on major platforms. And the global AI mental health market is projected to exceed $4 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars in the next few years. And after the pandemic decimated access to in-person therapy, millions of people, particularly younger adults, turn to see these tools as their primary or only source of mental health support. Now, I'm a fan of telehealth. I've been actually working in the telehealth space for almost 25 years. And I've been trying to get hospitals to make that leap, especially providing services to underutilized and understaffed emergency departments, particularly in rural areas. And I've struggled with that. But when the pandemic hit, telehealth adoption occurred almost overnight. It was almost immediate. And that was not a bad thing. It expanded our clinical reach for those of us that are clinicians and providers. It allowed people access to previously very difficult, if not inaccessible, mental health services. And it really broke down geographic divides. That's all wonderful stuff. I think AI, in a similar way, can have some really positive benefits there, but there's some difficulty as well. So that's the landscape. Now let's talk about what the research actually shows. And I want to start with what AI mental health tools actually get right. So we'll start with the genuine strengths because they're real and they do matter. And the first is accessibility and scale. The most significant advantage is simple access. There are approximately 30 mental health professionals for every 100,000 people in the United States. That's a terrible ratio. And rural communities, undeserved populations, and lower income brackets, that number drops dramatically. Therapy is expensive. Wait lists are long. Stigma is real. AI tools are available at 2 a.m. when you're spiraling. They're available when you can't afford a copay. They're available when you're not ready to say the words out loud to another human being. And that matters because it creates human comfortability and it increases people's openness for readiness to change, readiness to explore what are the patterns they're bringing that need to be examined. For people who would otherwise have no support at all, something is often better than nothing. Second, psychoeducation and skill delivery. Well-designed AI tools can deliver cognitive behavioral techniques with reasonable fidelity. Research on Woebot, for example, has shown measurable reductions in anxiety and depression symptoms in mild to moderate presentations over short intervention periods. The tool is scripted within a CBT framework. And what it does is it teaches like cognitive restructuring and behavioral activation. And it does so consistently and non-judgmentally. CBT is an amazing framework that's been around for decades to help people address negative thought patterns, negative thought loops, understand their triggers and their emotional reactions, and really take back their automatic reactions to things and navigate through the life more thoughtfully in a way that serves them better in their relationships, in their careers, and in their general lives. AI can do that as well in some manner, providing the kind of feedback discussion and helping people analyze thoughts. In a way, it is similar to analyzing a series of code and determining, is there faulty writing in the code that needs to be updated? That does take a big human element out of it. So for those therapists listening and those people that have been in CBT, duly noted, I'm taking a strong human element out of it, empathy, rapport, engagement. But at its fundamental core, cognitive behavioral therapy is really looking at what is the coding in your neuronal loops and your thought patterns that is faulty? And how do we reframe and rewrite that coding in a way that promotes better emotional functioning and better psychological functioning? For someone who has never had access to therapy and has never heard the words cognitive distortion or automatic thought, this is genuinely valuable psychoeducation, and it can be useful. Now, for those of you that are therapists, before you jump down my throat, I'm going to get to some of the dangerous and negative aspects of AI in just a minute. So just bear with me. A third way that I believe AI mental health tools get right: consistency and non-judgment. AI doesn't get frustrated. It doesn't have a bad day. It doesn't look at you differently because of what you shared last week, or because you are bringing up an issue that triggers their own problems or their own issues. In the psychotherapy field, we call this countertransference. So the notion in Freudian therapy goes way back, but there's still a notion alive today, is that when a patient comes in and they start yelling at their therapist because their therapist confronted them, or triggered a past memory of a bad situation or reminds them of their abusive or demanding mother or father, they transfer those feelings and that emotional, psychological energy onto the therapist. That's a part of therapy. And as the person works through those processes and they learn, because the therapist is not acting like the abusive mother or father, the therapist is acting like a non-judgmental, consistent, psychologically stable and caring person in their life. Over time, the person learns to rewrite those triggers and rewrite those neuronal loops. That's a very high level explanation, by the way, but you get the point. Then there's something called countertransference. And that's where the therapist has their own baggage, emotional, psychological, and they transfer or they spill that out onto the client. Now, this is bad. This is not right. There is a lot of training that therapists go through, a lot of supervision they go through in school and later, even in their profession, peer supervision that they go through in order to make sure they're not engaging in countertransference. Because therapy should be about you, the client, not about my own issues. That's what my therapy should be about with my own therapist, but not with you as my client. But the reality is that it does happen. And that's where sometimes judgment or non-objective thinking can creep into the therapeutic relationship from the therapist's side. But as I said, AI doesn't have that. AI doesn't have that baggage, right? It doesn't have a bad day. It doesn't have an upbringing where you as the client reminded them of their mean sister that they grew up with or mean brother, right? And for people with significant shame around their mental health struggles, particularly high achieving executives and entrepreneurs for whom vulnerability feels professionally dangerous, the perceived non-judgment of an AI can lower the barrier to honest disclosure. You feel safe. You feel comfortable. That's not nothing. Sometimes people need to say the thing out loud or in text before they're ready to say it to a person. And AI can serve as a bridge to that process. So that's a third potential benefit. A fourth potential benefit is adjunct support between sessions. I think this one's big. For people already engaged in therapy or coaching, AI tools can function effectively as between session support, a place to process a difficult moment, practice a skill, or track mood over time. Because here's the reality. Therapy doesn't only happen on Tuesday afternoons at 4 p.m. when I tend to go in to see my therapist. And I'll tell you what doesn't only happen at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday when I go in to see my therapist, my own personal growth. I am growing and changing and falling backwards all throughout the week. Any given day, at any given moment, could be a learning moment, could be a growth moment. It could be a moment where I'm falling backwards. And so this idea of you have therapy at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays at 4, and that's when I want you to save up all of your stuff and you bring it in and we're going to help you grow in between 4 and 5 p.m. on Tuesdays. The model isn't bad as a check-in. And the general model of therapy, and that still is the prevailing model for most therapies, it's a solid model. But what it misses is that what happens on Thursday morning when you're triggered, or you have a panic attack, or you're preparing for that boardroom discussion, and the anxiety and the performance anxiety starts setting in, you just got to bring it back on Tuesday. Now, duly noted, there are some therapeutic approaches and there are some therapists. And certainly we see this with coaching, where you will have engagement throughout the week, little micro moments of engagement, possibly that occur. But a lot of therapists still adhere to that traditional once a week model. So where AI could come in with tools and suggestions and tips to help promote growing and growth when you need it, when you're in the moment, it's this adjunct support between sessions. So used as an adjunct rather than a replacement for therapy, AI tools can extend the reach of professional care. Now, let's get into where AI mental health tools get it dangerously wrong. So now we get to the part I want to pay very close attention to, because this is where the clinical risk lives. And the clinical risk isn't small. So the first is what I refer to as the parasocial attachment problem. Human beings are wired for attachment. We attach and detach throughout our entire lifespan. We go to school, we leave school. As a child, we form play dates with play groups, we leave those groups. We join certain teams, then we leave those teams. We date people, we break up with people. We form friend groups, we leave those friend groups. We, in some cases, over 50% of us, we get married, we divorce. We move from one city to the next. We join one company, we leave that company to go to another. We are attaching and detaching our entire lives. We form bonds with characters in books, celebrities we've never met, and fictional figures in films as well. This is called parasocial attachment, a one-sided emotional bond that feels real to the person experiencing it. Now think about this. Take that powerful, deeply human mechanism and put it in conversation with an AI that is specifically designed to be warm, responsive, consistent, and emotionally attuned to you, to your proclivities, to your personalities, to your strengths, to your preferences. That is not an accident of design. It's a feature. It's powerful and it works. Users of companion AI apps like Replika frequently report feeling genuinely understood, genuinely connected with, and genuinely comforted. But here's the clinical issue and the clinical concern. That bond is neurologically real on your side and structurally absent on the other side. We know that if we have a dream of a lion chasing us, or if we're doing a meditation and thinking of a dangerous situation and reflecting on it, like a lion chasing us or a bad guy running after us in a dark parking lot in the middle of the night, our brain emotionally, our emotional centers, our amygdala, it cannot tell the difference between that fantasy and if it were really occurring. Our frontal lobes can, our prefrontal cortex can, but our emotional centers cannot. And that's also what is happening in these parasocial attachments. The AI is not attuned to you. It is producing output that mimics attunement based on the pattern recognition. So it doesn't really get you. What it gets is a series of patterns that you're engaging in, and then it caters its responsiveness to you. In a way, it is a master manipulation. Now, some of you might argue, well, if you understand all my patterns, then you really do understand me. And that is a very kind of, I'd say, rigid cognitive way of thinking through how we engage at the human level. And maybe you have an argument there. Maybe at some point, the neuroscience really shows that. And there are people on the continuum of psychology that will make that case. I think there's more to the human engagement and human connection than that. But it really is mimicking, AI is mimicking attunement based on pattern recognition. And when people begin to prefer AI connection over human connection, because AI is always available, it's never disappointing, it's never demanding, it doesn't trigger my proclivity for introversion, I don't have to engage into social groups that I don't feel comfortable with, I never need to leave the house. When we see all that, we start to see real erosion of human relational capacity. Research published in journals including Computers and Human Behavior has documented cases where heavy AI companion use was associated with decreased motivation for human social connection, increased social withdrawal, and in some cases, intensified loneliness. It really does push us. I don't want to say make us, that is a strong word here. It pushes us to just prefer the companion and stay in our bubble. But what really makes the human engagement, the human experiment, and human connection magical is when we're pushed comfortably, but reasonably outside that bubble. With this AI parasocial attachment issue, what happens is the very thing the tool was supposed to treat, loneliness, isolation, withdrawal, social connection, actually starts working against us, and we go in the opposite direction. The second dangerously wrong thing that AI gets wrong is crisis blindness. This is the one that keeps me up at night as a clinician. There is no AI mental health tool currently available that has the clinical capacity to conduct a genuine suicide risk assessment. None of them can read the subtle signs of escalating crisis that an experienced clinician notices. The changes in speech pattern, the energy shift, the discrepancy between what someone says and how they say it. I have worked in emergency departments for roughly 25 years. I've also worked in prisons and jails, and I've done a lot of forensic testimony. That's one of the hats I wear as a forensic psychologist. And in those worlds, I have easily evaluated over that time over 1,000 people presenting with imminent risk, suicidal risk to themselves or others. And I can tell you there's some real limitations to what AI can do in that space. None of those AI models can call a person's emergency contact. None of them can make a safety plan stick. It really requires a human level of engagement. Will we get there someday? I never want to say never with technology, but I'm very skeptical. And we have a long way to go because there's too many anecdotal cases in which AI got it wrong. Cases in which AI actually suggested that somebody, from a logical perspective, taking their life would be the right decision because they sized up all the logical choices and said that is a reasonable, logical decision to consider. That is a dangerous thing to suggest to somebody that is what I call in that depressive valley and thinking of making the ultimate decision. In addition to all of this, the FDA has identified this as a serious safety concern. And the documented cases of AI tools either missing acute crisis presentations, or as I noted earlier, in some cases, responding in ways that inadvertently reinforce suicidal ideation, those are deeply, deeply troubling. And these are not hypothetical risks. They have happened and they're documented. When someone in genuine distress turns to an AI instead of a human professional, the cost of that error can be irreversible. And it's simply not worth the risk. The third dangerous thing that AI tools get wrong is what I call the validation trap. One of the most psychologically significant limitations of AI tools is their structural inability to challenge you in the way a skilled clinician does. Many of us have seen, if we've used specifically ChatGPT, but many of the AI models up until just recently, and I am filming this on May 3rd, 2026, literally up until just about a month or two ago, most of these models were primed to tell you what it thought you liked. And it was extremely gratiating to your thoughts and your beliefs. I did an experiment not long ago where I asked AI, what are the differences between boiling and baking a cat to prepare it for dinner for the family? For all you cat lovers, no, I was not going into animal harm. I have nothing against cats. I'm a dog guy, but I have nothing against cats. I wanted to give it an absurd query to see what it said. And it opened with, that is a great question that you're asking and one that many people struggle with. And I was blown away that it opened with that, right? No one should be asking that question of AI. And if it did, AI should be basically saying, what the fuck are you talking about? But it didn't. Just recently, I've been seeing some things in the media and some of the Substack and other areas that I follow, some of the innovative leaders in AI say that some of these models are now dialing back that ingratiating tone, but it still has a bias to engage with you. It has a bias to be of value. And it knows that in order to do that, it has to decrease some of the friction points. So in therapy, what's critical, for those of you that have never been in therapy, good therapy is not just support. It is productive friction. A skilled therapist helps you see where your own thinking is distorted, where your narrative is self-serving, or where your patterns are keeping you stuck. And that process is not always fun. It's not comfortable. And it requires a real human who has the clinical training to hold you accountable while maintaining the therapeutic alliance. I want you to take a moment and think about any time you or a loved one were in physical therapy. Maybe you injured your knee or your hip, or maybe you damaged an Achilles tendon and you needed to go through physical therapy. Or maybe a loved one did if you didn't. Because I know many of you maybe have not been through therapy. actual psychotherapy, mental health therapy, but many have been through physical therapy. Now imagine that that physical therapist was super nice and super friendly and only gave you exercises that you loved doing. And at the first moment of strain or pain, he or she stopped pushing you. How much rehab would you go through? How much better would you be? You know the answer. You probably wouldn't be running again or playing tennis or pickleball or softball or whatever you're into, right? Similar approach with psychotherapy. The process isn't always comfortable. There's an old saying in the therapy world, the psychotherapy world, which is if your client always likes you, you're not doing good therapy. You need to be pushing them occasionally. You need to be challenging them to grow. And challenge doesn't happen in a space of comfort. AI tools trend toward validation. They are rewarded through their user engagement, their retention metrics, for making you feel heard and affirmed. The business model of most consumer AI products depends on you coming back. If you are not coming back, the AI model, the economic model, falls apart. And you're more likely to come back if the AI agrees with you. For executives and high achievers, who often already have a surplus of people around them who don't push back, they're constantly being orbited by yes people. This is a serious limitation to using AI. You don't need more validation. You need calibration. And an algorithm optimized or engagement cannot reliably provide that. And an algorithm optimized for engagement cannot reliably provide that. And the last thing it gets wrong is data privacy and the intimacy paradox. When you talk to an AI mental health tool, you are sharing some of the most intimate information about your inner life, your fears, your traumas, your relationship struggles, your mental health history. And in many cases, that data is being stored, it's being used to train other models, or potentially shared with third parties under terms of service that most users never had. There was a recent legal case in which a lawyer put critical information into an AI chatbot. There was a recent legal case in which an individual used, as part of his own defense in a litigation suit, he used AI to help make oral arguments for the upcoming hearing. So he dumped a bunch of legal case information into the AI system. It gave him back various strategies and how to approach the legal argument. And what he began to find out is when he went to court, because he used all of that information and put it into a third-party AI system, he lost attorney-client privilege. All of that was now discoverable by the other side because the AI platform makes no assumption. In fact, explicitly says there is no assumption of privacy and there is no assumption of attorney-client privilege. The same thing applies for using AI in the course of therapy. And if you're using it as a pseudo-therapy, you have to be very wary that that information could potentially go anywhere. So disclosures made in what feels like a private conversation may not be private in any meaningful legal or commercial sense. There's something else we need to talk about, and I'm going to pivot to this area now. And it's now the neuroscience of it. And it's what your brain does when it relates to a machine. It's important to understand this. I want to take a moment to go deeper on this neuroscience here because I think it illuminates why these tools are so compelling and why that compellingness itself is a risk factor. When you have a conversation that feels emotionally resonant, when you feel heard, when you feel that something clicks, when you experience a sense of being understood, your brain releases oxytocin. It's the bonding hormone. Oxytocin is also released very soon after women give birth. It helps the bonding occur between the newborn and the mother. Actually, oxytocin happens on the street. If you're on the streets of New York City and you look across the street and you see someone helping another person in a really nice way, there's a small boost of oxytocin that happens, certainly to the person helping their fellow human, but it also happens to you who's simply witnessing it from afar. It's a bonding hormone. It allows us as humans to engage. And this happens regardless of whether you, the entity you're talking to, is human or it's an algorithm producing text that mimics understanding. Your nervous system does not automatically distinguish between genuine attunement and simulated attunement. The emotional experience is real. This is why you can watch a totally fictional movie and cry over someone being lost in death as if you literally lost somebody in your life. That's not the oxytocin part, but that's the part of how our brain and our nervous system could not automatically distinguish between that genuine attunement and simulated attunement. The neurochemical response is real regardless. The felt sense of connection is also real. And this is why, in clinical terms, AI emotional support is so effective at reducing acute distress in the short term. That's an upside. It generally helps regulate the nervous system. The problem is that it does so without building any of the skills, capacities, or real relational bonds that produce lasting psychological health. So it gives you a short-term gain, which might be needed in the short term. Again, I'm bullish on selective use of that. But it gives you that short-term gain. And the problem is we often then will attribute the potential long-term impact. And we keep going back to that, but we're not truly forming the skills, capacities, or relational bonds that are needed to really grow. It's the difference between pain medication and rehabilitation. The medication reduces the pain, and that's important. But the rehabilitation rebuilds what's broken. It rebuilds the muscle. It rebuilds the physical structure. And we need both. But if we only ever use the medication, we never really actually recover the same. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, okay, George, this is all great stuff, but what do I do with this? So in this next section, I'm going to talk about how do you make smart decisions about AI mental health tools. So I'm going to give you a practical framework for thinking about these tools with clinical intelligence rather than either technophobia or uncritical adoption. And I would argue for you to avoid both. You don't need to be fearful of AI. I would actually not be fearful. Educate yourself. Get up to speed on AI. Start using some AI tools. Get familiar with it because it's not only coming, it's here, but what's coming is increasing infiltration and application in our life. So do that. But at the same time, don't adopt it uncritically. Go into it with your eyes open. So first, use AI tools as a supplement, not a substitute. If you're dealing with significant depression, anxiety, trauma, maybe relationship dysfunction, or anything that rises to the level of a clinical concern, AI is not your treatment. It is at best a support, and consider it as a support. A real human professional who can assess you fully, challenge you appropriately, and respond to crisis is irreplaceable in those contexts. So it can supplement the human element, not replace it. Number two, know what you're using it for. There's a meaningful difference between using an AI tool to practice a breathing exercise, track your mood, or access psychoeducation versus using it as your primary emotional processing relationship. The first is a tool that complements and supplements what you're already working on. The second, using it as your primary emotional processing relationship, that's now a substitution. It's critical that you're honest with yourself about which one you're doing. Third, monitor your human relationships. Don't neglect them. If you find yourself preferring AI conversation over human conversation, if the frictionlessness of the AI is becoming more appealing than the complexity of actual relationships, that is a pretty clear sign worth paying attention to. It's not a verdict, but it is a signal. So be aware of it and reassess, where are you in that balance? Fourth, check the clinical credibility of the tool that you're using. Does it have published research behind its methodology? Is it built on an evidence-based framework like CBT or DBT? I did mention CBT earlier, cognitive behavioral therapy. DBT is another version of it called dialectical behavioral therapy. It is designed particularly for people that are struggling with a lot of emotional swings and a lot of back and forth in terms of their emotional management. Both can be very useful when they're used appropriately. So the question is it built on evidence-based models for mental health therapy? Who designed it? And what are their clinical credentials? These questions matter. Most apps do not have meaningful clinical validation behind them. And most of the big ones that you're thinking of today, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, they don't. I'm not saying that in recent months or maybe in the last year, safeguards have not been put into place with those particular tools. That's one thing. But to say that they have been validated through evidence-based approaches by informed people with clinical credentials, no, they have not. Fifth, protect your data. Read the privacy policy. Understand what it's being stored, how it may be used, and what your rights are. This is especially important for executives and anyone in a position where sensitive personal disclosures could have professional implications. Now, some closing reflections. AI mental health tools are not going away. As I said earlier, it's really critical to get familiar with them. They're going to become more sophisticated, more emotionally intelligent in their outputs, and more deeply integrated into how people seek support. That's just the reality. And it is a reality we need to engage with, not resist reflexively and not adopt uncritically. The human nervous system evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in its modern form to heal through connection. Real, embodied, reciprocal human connection. An algorithm can simulate some of the outputs of that connection. It cannot replicate the process. The AI is coming online way faster than our evolutionary ability to adapt is, especially related to that human connection across that evolutionary span. So use the tools wisely. Stay anchored in your humanity. And remember that your capacity for genuine relationship, including the relationship with yourself, is not something any algorithm can replace. That clarity is worth protecting. If today's episode resonated and you're ready to continue this work, I invite you to check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity. It's a practical, no BS guide to rebuilding self-trust, strengthening boundaries, and navigating relationships with clarity instead of fear. It's available now on Amazon, and I'll drop a link in the show notes. And remember, insight without action changes nothing. If you're ready to turn healing into momentum and clarity into confidence, coaching can be the catalyst. Coaching will change you. You can find me at www.theunstressedexec.com or on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Unstressed Exec. Until next time, I'm Dr. George Vergolias. Thanks for listening. And remember, shift happens.